Let's investigate Ionic page and using deep linking within our application. So I've made a new Ionic project named Ionic page. So if we cd into Ionic page and run this in the browser with Ionic serve, you can see we have a standard blank Ionic application. So let's remove the home page and instead replace that with a posts page. I'll also be creating a post detail page, and what I want to do is list the posts in the post page, have a post details page which would represent a URL structure like posts/detail/ID. So ID could be 1, 2, 3, 4, and we could navigate to that URL and it would fetch the appropriate post. So let's start off by removing that home page because we'll be creating our own posts page and we'll be lazy loading that. So we'll need to get rid of that. So I've deleted the home page. We can remove this from app module, remove it from the declarations and the entry components. We'll also need to remove it from the app component.ts and instead supply a new root page. So if we run Ionic generate page posts, that should generate a new page named the posts page. If we take a look, we can see that we have export class posts page. So that will be the class that we will navigate to when lazy loading. So we can say that our root page is now a string equal to posts page. That's all we need to do. We don't need to add it to the app module or anything like that. So here we have it, we have posts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of the navbar to primary. And I'm also going to generate a provider. Now this provider will go to a web service, it will get some placeholder data, and we will display this in the application. So let's generate a provider now with Ionic generates provider data, and this will be the data provider. Because we generated it with the Ionic CLI, it's automatically added to our app module and added it to the providers array like so. So all we need to do now is write a function. So that function is going to be called getPosts, and we can say this.http.get, and now we need to get a URL. So the REST API that we're going to be using is JSON placeholder. So we can find this at the URL of jsonplaceholder.typecode.com. So let's take that, add that to a root URL object, like so. So we have now a string named root URL, and we can say this.http.get, and we can pass in that root URL. We'll have to do a slash because we want to do /posts. So we could, even if we wanted to, say posts, like so. So then we'd be able to say /posts. So this would get the posts from the web service. We could then map that to only return the JSON. So we could say response.json. And also, I just want to take 1. So we'll add the take operator from RxJS, add operator take, and we can say take 1. So this will complete the observable after pushing that response. So now we can go back over to our posts page. But before we do that, actually, we'll need to head back to appmodule.ts, and as we're using HTTP, we'll have to import the HTTP module from Angular/HTTP. So once we've done that, added it to the imports inside of our ng module, we can continue. So back over at posts.ts, we would have a function like getPosts, and that would simply give us a list of posts. So in order to categorize our list of posts, I'm going to make a model. So inside of the models folder, we'll have a posts.interface.ts, and we can export an interface named post. And in this post interface, we know that each post will have a user ID associated with that. And if we take a look at the structure of the object, it's a user ID, which is a number, an ID, which is a number, a title, which is a string, and a body, which is a string. So we can say user ID number, title, string, and body, string. We can now say that our posts should be an observable of posts. So our posts array should be an observable array of post, like so. So inside of our posts page, we'll need to import observable and post. We can do that by importing from rxjs/observable, observable, and we'll also need to import from models/posts.interface. I'm going to rename that to post.interface, like so, and we can import that. And we can then import our data provider, so we can say private data provider. And to use the data provider, we will have to import from providers/data/data, and then say data provider. So now we can use that inside of our posts component. And we can say this .data.getPosts, and we can put the result of that to our posts object. Inside of our posts page, then, we could do an ion card header. Inside of the header, we'd have a title. The title would be the post title, so post.title. Inside of the ion card content, we would perhaps have a paragraph tag saying post.body. And for completeness, we can also add the post.userid. If we wanted to, we could also add the post.id, so we know the post ID as well as the post title. And then finally, we can wrap this up with an ng4 saying let post of posts, and make sure that we pipe this to an async because it's an observable. Now, if we take a look inside of our application, we forgot to add a return here, so we need to say return this.http.get inside of our data provider. And finally, we need to call our this.getPost. So we'll add this to the constructor and simply say this.getPosts inside of our post page constructor. So when we load our application now, we have a title and we also have some information about that post. It should be good enough now to generate that post detail page. So we can say generate page post detail. And we can make a function inside of our post page named navigates to detail with a post ID, and we know that post ID is a number, so we can say this.navcontrol.push. We can pass in the post detail page, because if we take a look at our post detail.ts, that's the name of the class, and we can also pass along the post ID. So if we then, when the view is about to load, pick up the post ID, so let's make a variable named post ID of type number, and we can say this.postID is equal to this.navparams.get post ID. We should be able to therefore log out the post ID. Finally, if we make it so when we click one of these cards, we can say navigate to detail, pass in the post.id. So whenever card we are, we're going to pass in that particular ID. And if we take a look now inside of the application, if we click one of these cards, we do get 1, and that's because that's the ID. If we go further down, we get 5, and so on. Now this is really good, but you notice that our URL bar doesn't reflect this at all. We have the post ID and it's been passed along as a nav parameter, but our URL bar doesn't reflect this. It still says localhost/post detail. So what I'm going to do is we're going to add something called a segment. Now, the segment for our post page is posts, but we could change that to, for example, post list, just for demonstration purposes. And we can do that by adding the object inside of this Ion page and saying segment post list. And now you can see that our URL bar reflects that. So we have localhost/post list. Let's put it back to posts for now, just so you can get an idea of how to change the segment. And inside of our post detail, we can add a segment here. And this one will be posts/post ID. And that will reflect the post ID that we've selected. So if we save this and now click one of the cards, such as number 2, our URL bar now reflects posts 2, which is good. Let's now get a post when this page loads. So we're going to head back over to our data service and we're going to say get post by ID. And we're going to say ID is going to be a number. will then return a HTTP call, which goes to the root URL, like before, this.root URL, slash the posts URL, so this.posts, slash, and then the ID that we want to get the post for. We can do the same here. We can map this, and we can return the JSON response and only take one response. So inside of the post detail, we could then say this.data, and we'd have to import data service. So let's do the same. We can say private data, data provider, import this at the top. And we could say this.data.getPost by ID, pass in the post ID. And we could do the same by saying post is of type post. We would need to import post from our models. So import from models/post.interface. And then just for quickness sake, I'm going to copy the Ionic card from the posts page and add it to the details page. And instead of saying ng4 and having this click event, we can then say post async. So we'll make sure that the post is piped with async because it's an observable. We'll also add the question mark after this because it's not going to exist the second that we go into the page. And then we'll say .id, .title, and so on. So let's do that for all of our properties. I'm also going to change the navbar color to primary once again. And we could even change the title to be the post ID again. So simply just ID. Obviously, we'll need to surround that with a binding. And if we go to the posts page, we now have that detail view. So let's see if we go to posts 3, we get the detail view for 3, and so on. So we've now implemented a deep link inside of our application, but we can go a little bit further than this and we can add the posts page as a default history of the post detail page. Let's take a look at that. But if we take a look then inside of the browser, we get invalid link posts. And that's because it's not necessarily reflectant of this segment. It's actually reflectant of this name. So the name could be this posts page here, or a name that we set ourselves. So we could set posts, and you'll notice that if we go to posts/4, we now have the default history if we click back to being that posts page. But if we remove the name and save that, we could just add the default history to be the posts page. So if we navigate to posts/1, we get the same result, which allows us to go back to the posts page. So in this video, we've created a new Ionic 3 application. We've looked at using a provider to get data from the HTTP service. We've also looked at adding an interface named post, as well as a variety of Ionic page-specific stuff like segments, default history, name, and so on. This allows us to deep link to particular parts of our application and make it especially more usable as we start to deploy our Ionic applications as a progressive web app.